Climate Week 2025, winners and losers. This is Energy Matters with Claire
and Dan.
So while the U.S. president called climate change a hoax, during Climate Week, New York City of 2025, we found very clearly that climate tech and climate change policy are wildly far apart. Dan, tell me what you learned at Climate Week 2025.
Well, so I think that the intro needs to be a little bit on what is Climate Week, and then maybe a bit more on what the president said. And not only did the president say what you just highlighted, but then the president went on to scold the Europeans. At the second day of Climate Week, he went to the UN. The escalator was turned off intentionally or not, wink, wink, to make his climb more difficult. And then he said that clean energy and immigrants were ruining Europe. And I guess he moved Europe into the category that in his first term he called blank hole countries. And so the incendiary comments were flying right and left at the UN side. What I learned at Climate Week, if I were to summarize it in one sentence, was there's a lot of cool stuff going on, but a lot of people are doing things a day late and $1 short.
Yeah, I agree with that. Tom Steyer wrote it well. He was spot on. He said the real economy doesn't care about ideology. It cares about what works. And, there's a lot of push right now to try to install more fossil fuels right now. The punchline is we're not going to install coal or gas quickly enough to meet rising demand, but we can get our power from renewables and distributed generation.
And for those who don't remember, Tom is both a billionaire and someone who made his money in hedge funds and ran for president and showed at the South Carolina primary that this man can really dance.
I think one of my major findings was that the discussion was about AI or artificial intelligence and energy. There was almost nothing about sustainability or ESG targets. Corporates and big tech were only in closed sessions. A couple of the learnings, in addition to what we just said about Tom Steyer, is that the people who are winning from the One Big Beautiful Bill Act are lawyers and accountants, because the laws keep changing and accounting rules keep changing. I learned that, once again, people are talking about utility rates that are going to increase. The Trump administration loves to blame renewables on that utility rate increase, and I want to make sure that everybody who's listening to this understands that it has nothing to do with renewables. It has to do with the Trump administration and what they're agreeing and not agreeing to. And I think folks in our industry need to get ahead of that narrative.
And certainly renewables have not only not caused the price increases, but we now have data not just from California, which I think that the current administration doesn't even think is part of the U.S. Whether it should be or not is a different story. But we have data from multiple states showing that renewables have shaved the peak, meaning they have been available when energy demand was high. So if anything, and certainly in some Western states, clean energy has actually kept all of our rates low, despite this DC narrative of fictitious, fraudulent, flaky comments designed to prop up the fossil fuel industry.
Right, as evidenced by the state of Texas as well, right? We have some data, and we'll add some data to energymatters.world about what's been going on in Texas. But essentially, Texas is over 30% renewable powered, and renewables are ensuring that Texans' utility rates are staying low. But I think another thing that I learned from Climate Week is that we're woefully unprepared for the brownouts and blackouts that are coming because of lack of transmission and distribution to meet increased demand.
So two things kind of to add to that. One is that I think that's right. The dialogue in the meetings that I went to, with one important exception that I'll get to in a little bit, we'll talk about in the second part of this episode, around the Clinton Global Summit, which is kind of a bubble within the bubble, and a bubble that's doing some historical re-envisioning the past, but we'll get to that later, is that the global dynamics that clean energy is now demonstrably cheaper than fossil fuels. Even a new clean energy power plant is a better deal than an existing fossil plant, which is an amazing story. But that the mechanisms and the barriers that can be put in place of not just renewables, but new things are really large. And so one of the features that we talked about briefly in an early episode was that the more power that this administration puts in the hands of judges and governors who have no background in the energy field are really very carefully designed efforts to dilute what in the rest of the world is becoming an area really dominated by subject matter experts. And what the US is doing is running the other direction, saying ideology counts, energy price, reliability, cleanliness. We really don't give a rat's behind about any of those.
Right. And it's clear, at least from the capital markets, that we've over-rotated on ESG targets, and, ESG as it once was is now dead, right? So CTVC said it well. This year crystallized a shift that's been building for the past few conference cycles. The final move from lofty pledges to pragmatic energy realism. Now those with the power are the ones producing power or buying it or making it so we can get more of it as fast as possible.
ESG are goals set by different companies to meet various sustainability metrics. We're going to buy cleaner products. We are going to manage our supply chain away from microplastics or dirty energy or whatever it is. We're going to establish an internal carbon market. And ESG means different things to different people, but almost every big company has an office and often a vice president or more that's focused on ensuring compliance or even innovation, although more compliance than innovation in this area.
Right. ESG is actually an acronym that stands for environmental, social, and governance, which is a framework that's usually used to assess a company's performance on sustainability or societal issues, which might be human rights or employee relations or management and shareholder rights. There's lots of different ways. I mean, it's very, very clear that both the Trump administration and a lot of the capital markets feels that we have over-rotated on ESG or environmental, social, and governance rules.
And I just have to put in the opposite, and that is I feel we've under-rotated because each time we do these goals, and I wish these were mandatory, not voluntary. I think that's the big weakness, that companies get to define whatever they want as their goals and then meet their goals, surprise, surprise. But I wish that we had over-rotated compared to this perspective, because there's lots of interesting data that the more you look at cleaner and more streamlined and more local jobs or more clean product issues, we find that companies discover new ways to save money that they wouldn't have otherwise found.
Right. I agree with that. And back to sort of Climate Week 2025, I think what was underscored to me from the business side is that data center and electrification of power demand is happening, right? And could be the forcing function for deployment of lots of clean, firm power using storage and grid innovation. But the Trump administration is pushing against that hardcore.
And that pushing has some really serious features. So in early October, the current U.S. administration, which is all I can ever bear myself to call it, announced the cancellation of just about $16 billion of projects that were all authorized under the Inflation Reduction Act. And surprise, surprise, over 90% of those cancellations were in blue states. Whereas, interestingly enough, when the Inflation Reduction Act was designed and then implemented, the goal was to put the majority of those projects in red states because many of the blue states already moved ahead, so they didn't need the lift up. So essentially, a bill that was designed to send money from red to blue states is not happening anymore, and the current administration is targeting really relentlessly the projects in those states that are actually best able to use the money they're getting, meaning the states that have already invested in clean energy standards, efficiency goals, ways to implement electric vehicles, all manner of things have really taken literally a $16 billion hit from this administration just in the recent past.
And despite a lot of what's going on, the data still suggests interesting things, right? So in the solar energy Industry Association, or SEIA's, latest Solar Insights report, they note that solar accounted for 56% of all new power capacity added in early 2025. So even despite a lot of what the Trump administration is trying to do, we're still seeing that solar is a mature long-term asset that reduces costs and strengthens grid resilience. Meanwhile, electricity demand is projected to rise a ton, by 25% by 2030, 78% by 2050, and solar and storage are the fastest, most affordable solutions to meet this challenge. So we're sort of beating a dead horse on this one, but our industry, became very clear to me from a business perspective, which obviously impacts policy, is that our industry needs to align and continue to advocate for bipartisan energy leadership that recognizes that renewables are the solution, not the scapegoat for rising energy costs. And I really desperately hope that the powers that be can make sure that the narrative becomes renewables are the solution, renewables are not the problem for rising utility costs.
And I think an interesting aspect of this narrative is it's not just a broad blanket statement that, renewables are good and they're being given this bad rap. It's that one of the aspects of the current policies is cutting U.S. companies that align with what the administration is saying, which is not an unreasonable thing to do. A company that can make a choice. Should I make more clean energy projects, or should I launch them versus staying in fossil projects? A company that is listening to the administration is cutting itself out of the global market, because the global market is totally going in a different direction. And so it's sad from a competitiveness basis, and we saw, of course, recently that the latest U.S. job reports are showing yet again under a Republican administration some record losses compared to prior times. And it's very sad to see those companies that really follow the federal lead losing market opportunities overseas, whereas everyone else, China, Europe, South Africa, Brazil, are jumping in at these opportunities that U.S. companies could have filled, but they're not, because they are not part of this transition.
So that's probably a good segue, Dan, to the Clinton Global Initiative, which was a big subset of what happened at Climate Week. Not something a lot of business people, well, certainly I didn't attend, and a lot of business people didn't attend, a lot of other important people did, but the Clinton Global Initiative was founded by former President Bill Clinton in 2005 to bring together leaders to develop and implement solutions to big, huge global challenges. And the attendees had to commit to taking specific, measurable actions, addressing big issues. You were there, I believe, the whole time. So tell me, what did you learn? What are you most concerned about, and what are you most hopeful for?
So that's right. This is, like I said in the beginning, a bubble within a bubble. It's a bubble I happily dove into, but it is certainly a subset, although a big subset. It occupied a very prominent central place, a whole hotel at the meeting. And President Bill Clinton, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, and Dr. Chelsea Clinton were the masters of ceremonies at the shows. And it tends to be a celebration of innovative, pro-human, pro-justice, pro-DEI, diversity, inclusion, equity projects. And I did attend the whole time, and actually one of my teams got to present their project. And so it's a project in Kenya, in Kibera, which is the biggest slum or low-income settlement, depending how politically correct we're being, settlement in Nairobi, and a project called the Human Needs Project, which is a women's-focused urban center, serves between 500 and 700 women and children a day. And it's a safe place to do washing and laundry and bathroom facilities and learning skills like building apps and a green store, etc. So we were able to present a plan and commit to a plan that was funded by donors in Denmark and donors in the US and some local partners in Kenya to build a second facility like this in the same low income or slum area. And this is no small slum. This is 1 million people packed into a tiny area. And so it was great fun for me to see our team presenting and to have our team leaders from Kenya either present in person or Zooming in to highlight everything we've done, from very clear, very pure water that we're pumping from deep underground that we're using in our own facility and providing free to the local schools. Urban agriculture that we're doing also on local schools. In fact, the biggest high school in Kenya, called Olympic School, is the direct beneficiary. And to watch very different groups present their versions of the same. I listened to talks by groups that were using smart AI systems to have drones not go bomb people in areas as is happening around the world today, but de-ice airplanes and windmills and tractors and roadways. I saw companies that were being put together to build solar all over irrigation canals in India and in parts of Southeast Asia. I saw interesting efforts put forward by Native American communities to build mini grids to power homes. And I saw a great deal of effort put around how do you use new technology not to alienate people or to disempower people, but to make e-government. Can you get your driver's license, your passport, your local title to land? Can you get those things whether you live in a city or not? And so to the center-left community, and some people would just say the center community because this was hardly radical, all of those things were bubbling around and you couldn't stop 10 feet without meeting another cool project, all of whom were also bemoaning where the U.S. is turning to at the moment.
Disappointing. I mean, I think another thing was Secretary Clinton marked the 30th anniversary of her remarks at the UN World Conference on Women, as I understand.
That is right.
Yeah, which is so interesting and so cool. And there's lots more reports on priorities critical to advancing the full and equal participation of women and girls in the 21st century, including in the areas of democracy and human rights, technology, economic participation, and conflict and climate. So amen to that.
So one of the really interesting things that comes up from walking around Climate Week is you meet all of these really creative innovators looking for partners, looking for support. And one of the things that I was really proud to pass around was a book that was recently published by the University of California, Berkeley. And it's somewhere between a factual story and a factually accurate piece of propaganda. Take your pick. It's a book called Startup Campus, and it highlights the fact that not only is UC Berkeley now #1 and has been for a couple years in launching new startups, many of which are in the clean energy space, but maybe more interesting across the spectrum is that what they find from an extensive survey across much of Silicon Valley is that the startups that have diverse leadership, meaning ethnic minorities and women, those startups raise more money on time, and meet their self-described and the goals set by their investors ahead of those that are not as diverse. And so there's a complicated story about, how does that take part? But I'm not surprised because diversity in companies tends to keep them more on target than those where it's, I guess I'll use the term, an old boys club of people who know each other. And so it at least gives me hope that when the U.S. returns to sanity, there is a lot of built up excitement and opportunity that we could be building on pretty quickly. But we've got to get out of this death spiral we're in right now first.
Yeah. Back to the old boys clubs. One thing that was encouraging about Climate Week 2025 in New York City was simply that there were a lot of girls clubs or women's clubs being set up as well. So, there's still the complex of being the only woman in the room, but it's becoming much less so over time. So I think, Dan, we're going to end here. With that, take a look at our website, energymatters.world. and leave us some comments. We're looking forward to hearing from you. Thanks for listening.